All right, welcome back. We're going to look some more at some statistics here. And I'm going to be using this data set that I used in a previous example to look at other aspects of this same data set. Because the idea is that there's a lot of information we can pull from a single data set, and we shouldn't just confine ourselves to saying, oh, look, we have this number, and that's all we need. Like, for instance, the last thing we did was we found the average. So one of the things I can do here is I can actually hit equals, and then I can go up to home here and then auto sum and actually grab average. I can also type that command in right here if it'll let me. So equals average, it just automatically pops up there, and then I can just tell it what I want, and I can highlight that entire column there, hit enter, and it's going to give me the average as being 900.88, meaning the mean or the value for x bar here is 900.8. If we were to round that, it'd be 901. So this data set right here, and the reason why I'd round to 901 in this instance, or maybe we'd round to 900, it really depends on the situation. This data set was looking at the number of nurses per 100,000 people in a particular state in the United States, including or plus the District of Columbia. It did not include Puerto Rico, which I think would be a really interesting number to have in here because District of Columbia's number was huge. It was up here. I forget exactly which one it was, but it was one of these upper ones right here. I'm really interested to see where Puerto Rico would fall into this because it's not a state, but it is a U.S. territory, and its value, it's actually more of a, I wouldn't necessarily say poverty-stricken state or territory, if you will, but it's not as affluent as some other places. So it'd be interesting to see what those numbers looked like for Puerto Rico as well, because those are fellow U.S. citizens there. Now, what else can we do with this, though? Now, we have the average here, but what else can we do with this after we have the mean? Well, one of the things we can do is I'm just going to go through here and I'm going to highlight all this, and there's a different way you can highlight. I'm just hitting shift and then I'm down arrowing. If you go too far, you can always go right back up and pick up the ones you want. And I'm going to pick that data pieces there that I want. I'm going to go up here to click insert, and I'm going to have the system create another graph for me. Now, a lot of these functionalities are available on your calculator. All these functionalities are available in Google Sheets and in Numbers. The keystrokes might be a little bit different, and in Google Sheets, I know you do have to add a data package of some sort to do some of the functionalities that we're going to do for this class. And as we get across to those, I'll try to show you what those are and how to do them. But you should be able just to go to add-ons and click data. I forget the exact words for Google Sheets, but I think it's something like data package or data add-on or something like that, data analysis. We're going to click this one here. And if you ever forget which one you need to deal with, you can always just kind of click these down arrows, and you can kind of move around and hover for a second, and it'll actually tell you what it is. In this instance, I'm actually going to go and I'm going to get box and whisker plot. And there it is. Now I'm going to get this a little bit bigger to make it easier to see. I'm actually make it so that it takes up most of my window here. And this is the box and whisker plot. Now what I need to do is I'm gonna go up here to set quick layout, and I'm going to choose the second option. And the reason I'm going to do that is because now it actually gives me these different values here, and we'll talk about these different values here in just a second and what these values mean for us. All right, but I did that because now I have these values plotted up here. And the system actually did something kind of interesting that we're going to talk about as well. And you can actually come across here, do all sorts of things, and you can have it do like a list off some grid lines. So I can have it do the grid lines horizontally and vertically and all sorts of other stuff. So we just pop that up there. So now there's the grid lines, so we can have a better inkling of where we will match up across ways there. And what we need to deal with now is, what does this box and whisker plot tell us? And I'm going to create another video where we're going to build this by hand as well, just so you have a better understanding of what it looks like. But I thought we'd talk about the idea of what is this box and whisker plot and what information can we gather from it. And of course, we have the system that can create it for us nice and cleanly. First thing, this value right here is outside of the box and whisker plot. So this is the 1483, and I forget which state this was, but that value is being pushed outside the rest of the numbers, and it's an outlier because it's so much larger than all the other values. All these other pieces represent 25% of the data in each particular region. So from 1017 up to 11296. That is 25% of the information, 25% of the numbers, 25% of the states lay there. 25% of the states lie between 901 and 1017. 25% lie between 798 and 901, and 25% lie between 555 and 798. So again, this is the number of nurses per 100,000 people in a state. And that's what we're looking at. So you can imagine this doesn't mean that this state has 1,296 nurses. It has 1,296 nurses per 100,000 people. Well, if I remember correctly, North Dakota or South Dakota, one of those two states was one of these larger numbers here, which kind of surprised me. There's something about South Dakota that apparently is very attractive to nurses. So they're moving there. And that might be interesting for the rest of the state to look at, or the rest of the country to look at, and see what is North Dakota doing or South Dakota doing that's different. So we now know that this blue box here of the box and whisker plots represents half of all the data. So half the states are actually represented inside that blue box, and half the states are outside those blue boxes. And then one state actually is way up here as an outlier. So 901, here's 901 right here, and that is our average or our mean. Now, what does that mean for us? Pardon the pun, but that's where in this instance, what we're talking about is actually, I think this is actually the median here, and we'll talk about the difference here and why we're interested in that. So the mean and the median here in this particular instance look like they may be pretty close to each other. But what it means is we line up the data when we come from either side, and we find that right here in the middle, and if you think about this as 51 pieces of data, right in the middle of 51 is 25 and 26. It'd be 25 and a half. And in between those two values would be the average of the 901 and 901. So the median and the mean here are almost the exact same value. All right. And if you need a refresher on how to find the median, it just means you get the numbers all in order, and you count from either end until you get to the center. And in this case, when you go from the center from 51, you'd find that the average, or the median, the middle number is 901. And since we're discounting 1483 as an outlier, we'd be counting from 50 inward, and that'd put us exactly at the item 25 there, which would be 901. All right, so meaning half of the data lies above 901 and half of the data lies below 901. Now, how is this useful to us? Well, one of the things it can tell us is if we have a really tight fit worth of data here. One of the interesting things to do would be compare this against another data set, maybe from another country, or maybe we compare ourselves to the European Union and see how we match up against the European Union. Is there a larger or smaller discrepancy between the higher and the lower values there? Is it a tighter knit? Is 50% of their people, is that those numbers really close to each other? They're really far. Like in this instance, we're talking about 50% of the country. They're within 200 nurses per 100,000 people across those 25 states. And then you have 25 states that have between 585 and 798, roughly another 200, another span of about 200. And then you go up from there and you have a span of about 200 again. Actually, it's closer to 3. So getting above this 1017 mark, it starts to spread out a little bit more. And again, this is just another way to look at this data to kind of give us an idea of what is going on with the overall events that are occurring here. The fact that the average that we found over here of 900.8 is so close to the median of 901 tells us that these values are pretty closely knitted together. And then we can look at the span of these numbers, and this is a pretty decently small span, although we are talking about a difference of nearly 700 between the highest and the lowest span inside of this chart that we're looking at. So at the higher end of this, states have 700 more nurses per 100,000 people than the state does down here, and that's a pretty big difference when you really stop and think about it. That's how does that affect healthcare? So if we look again at these states that were down here in this lower quarter and the number of nurses they have, we can ask questions like, what do they pay their nurses? What are the stress factors that go along with their nursing staff? Are their nurses having to drive a long period of time? There's actually other studies that have shown that I think there's a $500 or $5,000 or $8,000 differential for every 10 minutes worth of driving time, meaning for every additional 10 minutes of driving that you have to do to get to your job, the job needs to pay you an additional $5,000 to $8,000 or something like that. I forget the exact value. But is there a long drive for these these nurses down here? Is there a shorter drive for these up here, or do they pay them more, or is there a place where you kind of get this tipping point where you have so much nursing staff on hand, it reduces the stress for all the nursing staff, and it becomes simpler. So that's why there's a bigger span as you start to get into these upper realms here. You start to get into this place where it's easier to hire nursing staff because you already have so many nurses, and that reduces the stress load for each individual nurse. So there's lots of questions that we can ask once we see this data set here in front of us to look at, and that can be really useful for us to identify that process of what we're dealing with and what we're looking at. Okay, so enjoy, reach out with questions and comments as needed.